Good afternoon, good afternoon. Welcome to the second week of the Let's Start Justice program of Jamaicans for Justice. It feels good to be here with you again, Jade. I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
And I'm Jade Williams. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Specialist at JFJ.
All right, I trust our listenership is getting much larger, and the Bridge team and listeners and the family, they're sticking with us. But I just want to repeat from last week, our donor, Open Society Foundation, who continues to be a champion for human rights and supporting the work of Jamaicans for Justice. But before we go into the formalities of the program, as we say, we're going to be doing week by week. We're just going to be having a conversation of the human rights issues that came out of the previous week. And, I just want to start with a few things. First and foremost, the Firearms Act, the bill that we discussed last week, Jade.
Yes.
It was passed in Senate.
It was passed in the configuration that we had concerns about.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say it's unfortunate because, as we would have said last week, we do welcome the government's efforts to address the serious violence issues that are plaguing our society. But we hope that our points would still continue to be considered by the government so that when the act comes into review or when there are regulations prepared, some of our considerations might be taken into account.
And I think from our reading as well, we realized that there were 17 amendments, but we don't know the veracity of that, but we're going to be reviewing certainly from our perspective. Last week we made a comment and we touched on it briefly around the concerns we had with the utterances and what we called an empty rhetoric by the Minister of National Security. He has since sought to clarify and perhaps double down on certain things, and we do have concerns remaining around the leave persons to die possibly. But but I don't want to go back into that fully. I think the concern we have, Jade and listeners, is that persons have since questioned the role of JFJ, and there have been articles that were written, one of them in the Sunday paper, and I just think it's important that we clarify a few things. That, JFJ, we have been around for over
quite some time, since 1999.
Yes.
We've existed, and I think one of the reasons that we have so many misconceptions about what we do is that persons want to, when they hear justice, they think person to person. But when we think justice, we think government to person, because we think about the higher state of responsibility a government might have as opposed to an individual.
Yes, and in subsequent weeks, I want us to be able to reject this notion about criminal rights organization. JFJ represents all persons who are affected, and our work for the past couple of years include children, especially those in state care, persons who are affected by violence. And an utterance or statement that was made in an article about who may have benefited or not benefited from Mario Dean's situation. I just want to clarify to that author that JFJ continues to provide support in court to Mario Dean's family. And just lastly, to indicate that we have seen a historic referendum in Cuba where same-sex marriage
has been made legal.
Yes.
So the constitution will be rewritten to say persons who are married rather than man and woman.
Yes.
And I will take that note, talking about rights in another country, to go straight into our right of the day, which is fittingly the right to a healthy environment. And this means that persons have the right to an environment that is free from human intervention that will affect the water, air, or soil in a negative manner. And they should be free from toxins, waste, or hazards in their environment. So, today, one special feature of this episode is that we're doing a trivia of the week. So for those of you who are interested in engaging with the show and win $1,000 credit of your network of choice, our trivia of the week is: when did Jamaicans gain that right to an healthy environment? So you can send us a WhatsApp message to our WhatsApp number. Mikhail, what is that?
And the WhatsApp number is 239-7583, and certainly you can comment on our social media platforms.
Absolutely.
So to get right into it quickly, Jade, today we're focusing on the right to a healthy environment, and we're going to be looking specifically on the impact and implications of the Nrca spill. And just to indicate that the Rio Cobre River provides approximately 30 to 40% of fresh water to St. Catherine and supplies approximately 150,000 people for both domestic and agricultural purposes. Many fisher folk make a living by hunting and selling many species of aquatic life found in Rio Cobre.
Right. So between 2017 and 2022, there have been 4 different effluents, so that is waste discharges into the Rio Cobre by bauxite processing plant Windalco, and that has led to the contamination of the water for both domestic and agricultural purposes. And it's really affected the life and livelihood of the residents who live by the river.
And over an 8-year period between 2011 and 2019, Windalco was served with 6 enforcement notices by the National Environmental and Planning Agency, NEPA. And it happened again in 2021 and on July 30, 2022, which is really of concern here today, was that another effluent discharge resulted in a large fish kill in Rio Cobre.
So NEPA would have indicated that they intend to draw down on the full environmental performance bond against Windalco, and they also would have issued a notice to suspend their license to operate.
All right, so just to follow up, on August 3, 2022, the Minister without Portfolio of Ministry and Economic Growth and Job Creation, Senator Matthew Samuda, my apologies, assured citizens that if they fall ill due to the spill, they will be provided with the necessary support by the Ministry of Health, and those whose livelihoods have been disrupted by the spill will also receive some government support through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, as well as the Agriculture and Fisheries Ministry.
Minister Samuda did, however, indicate that the environmental performance bond would not be sufficient to compensate the residents and the individuals who may have been affected by the spill. So he indicated that the government would need to find additional funding and additional channels in order to assist those persons, but nothing further has been said about what that plan would be and when that compensation would start.
And that's the purpose of the conversation. So we're just going to take a short break, but on the other side of the break, when we return, we're going to be joined by Shadow Minister of Land, Environment and Climate Change, Senator Sophie Fraser-Binns, Attorney at Law Marcus Goff from Goff Law, and Kestenard Gordon,
who is the chairman at the St. Catherine Parish Development Committee.
All right, so please stay with us. All right, welcome back to Let's Talk Justice, and we have in studio with us Marcus Goff and Kestenard Gordon. Kestenard, I hope you're pronouncing the name properly.
Yes.
Okay.
You're doing a good job so far.
All right, great. And we have online with us Senator Sophie Fraser-Binns. I just want to point out before we go to Senator Binns that we had in fact invited Minister Samuda and NEPA's CEO, Peter Knight, to join the program, but both the gentlemen were unfortunately unavailable. And I just want to remind the listeners that when we return after our next break, you can call in at 676-4996. 239-7583 is the WhatsApp number to call. Welcome to the program, Senator.
Hi, Mikhail. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Is there any update that you're aware of before we get into some specifics?
No, actually, I'm not aware. You may recall that just last week we also issued a press release asking for the government and NEPA to provide the nation with an update as to what has happened since the announcement in August. And regrettably to date, over 30 days have passed and we have not received any update as to the actions that have been taken or any contemplation or deliberations that are undertaken at the time.
And just for the purposes of the listeners, can you remind us what that update should entail that we're expecting from the government?
Certainly. You may recall, you and your listeners may recall that soon after the spill, the minister had made a declaration that the performance bond would have been called upon. So we certainly wanted to know whether or not that has been done and whether any distribution has taken place and to whom the distribution has taken place. We also wanted to find out whether any government entities would be the beneficiary of the fund. We also sought to ascertain from NEPA whether or not there has been an appeal from Windalco. You do recall that Windalco was served notice We do not know if Windalco had appeal. We do not know if an appeal was done and whether or not it was heard and the outcome of it. And I think it is very important that the country be provided with this information so we know exactly what is taking place.
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jane.
No, it's okay.
All right, Kestanard, you're the vice chair and I believe a resident from the surrounding communities.
Yes, indeed.
Just explain to us what the community's response has been, how exactly are they affected by the spill from Windalco?
Well, right now, they are in a state of shock. The reality has started to creep in on them. This came about when they had to face the school fees, the regular housekeeping expenses, and to recognize that they no longer have this source of income that they have relied on for so many years, from generation to generation. They no longer have access to it. And therefore, it's a feeling of dismay, it's a feeling of disappointment, it's a feeling that they have been abandoned by the government. And to be honest with you, this is how the people feel. They feel that this regime doesn't make ruling on their behalf, and they feel that they are being unfairly dealt with, and they are being left exposed to an international corporation that has really no mercy on them in terms of how they release their effluent to destroy their food chain, to eradicate their source of employment, and to have poisoned the water supply of almost the entire parish. And this, I personally don't understand how this could go down so lightly with the government. Despite all the speeches that they're making in Parliament and all of those things, it doesn't matter. It has gone down very lightly. In history, if you were to poison the water of a nation, that is sufficient for more than war, a declaration of war. You don't poison the water of a people. It is a very, very serious thing, right? And to have really knocked out the entire water supply of a parish, it has gone to great depth of seriousness. And the people cannot understand how this government has been so laid back, and they have been so deceptive. Because, for example, even Senator Fraser Binns mentioned, was any notice served on Windalco? And if the notice was served, don't you as a government respect the rights of your citizens to be aware of the conditionalities of those notices and the consequences upon the people? The Nrca has gone cold silence, and if you think it's like I'm telling you, talk to every single news media in this country. Nrca has been a gag order has been put on Nrca by this government.
But
and
to be fair to the Prime Minister, though, Kestanard, he did speak publicly on the matter right after the spill, and the fact that they have drawn down on this performance bond. Wouldn't that signal to the community that the government is in fact listening to some of the concerns that they have had?
No, I think the government is being very deceptive. Look here, I didn't really want to reach this stage where I have a direct confrontation with the government, because I really have a lot of respect for Mr. Holness. Mr. Holness and I went to the same church. We used to sit down beside that. I'm telling you. So I have a lot of respect for that man. I know him as per somebody of integrity. And I mean, that was what I know then. But I'm telling you that Mr. Holness has not angered the poor people of his parish properly. Going to Parliament.
Mr. Gordon, before you go any further, I wonder though, what would the persons, because you sound very frustrated and I can understand that. Because as far as I can see from my research, this isn't the first time that something like this would have happened and affected the same communities that we're talking about now. So what would the community members like to see as a leader in the community? What have your community members been saying to you that they would want to see happen?
They want to see the effluent as total stoppage to the discharge in their water system. They are fed up of it. They cannot continue with it. they just, as a matter of fact, the people are not even so much, there are certain segment of of that population, they're not even so much concerned, believe me, about the compensation package and the drawdown and this performance ban. They just want to be left alone peacefully to run their own operation. That is all the poor people need from Mr. Holness. And I am saying, and I am calling upon Mr. Holness, as a matter of fact, I'm calling upon all parliamentarians to come out of this reticence in condemning what Windalco has done and take decisive actions to alleviate the problems that the people have been having over the years. It is unreasonable. I don't really have the proper English language to describe them.
I can understand, and we appreciate the passion and the emotion because it's affecting your lives in a real way. And as you say, you want to see some action. I would go to Mr. Goff and ask, based on our current legislative framework, what is it that can be done for these citizens outside of the government's clear limitations that they would have articulated already?
Well, I think that the reality is that this situation has been allowed to continue for much too long, And the reality is that as well, we have existing laws on the books that I think have not been fully utilized to be able to hold companies like Windalco accountable for these kind of events, So certainly we are under the Wildlife Protection Act. The discharge of any trade effluent into any body of water, river, etc. is a criminal offense, right? And so prosecution of that offense can be done pursuant to that act. Now, the fines are relatively low, and that may not be so much of a deterrent, unfortunately, but the fact is that I think by virtue of having more prosecutions, right? Of course, we already have Windalco in court from 2019, and so I'm saying that we need to use what we have in place on the statute books to ensure that the law is used for accountability purposes, right?
And Minister Samuda did indicate that in the next legislative cycle, they will try and increase some of the fines under the Wildlife Protection Act. Yes. But to you, Senator, before we go to the break, I just want to ask you, what exactly is the call from the parliamentary opposition regarding the updates? And is there a call, perhaps, for Windalco's permit to be suspended?
Certainly. Mikhail, you may recall that our first release, we actually asked for the suspension of the permit. You may know that one of the reasons why the effluents continue to be disposed of in the river is because the pond which is required has not been completed. And so the opposition is of the view that until that is completed, then the permit should be suspended. So that's the first thing. The second thing as well is in our second release where we spoke to the need for an update. We think it is very important that the country be apprised of what actions, if any, that have been taken by NEPA to ensure that, one, there's no recurrence of this, but secondly, that the community that has been so impacted, that sufficient resources are made so that they can return to a reasonable life that existed prior to the dislocation which has taken place through the effluents in the river. I want to say something as well, if I may, and I know you're going on a break. Please. Because Marcus, my very dear friend who I haven't said hello to, mentioned the legislation which exists, and I fully support it. And I also support the minister's call for increased legislation. But there's another issue, and Kes is perhaps the best person to share with you the concern we have, and that has to do with the court system. Because the matters that have been in the court system have been there for a number of years, and to date they have not been resolved. So even with an increased fine, which we do support, there has to also be a particular provision that ensure that matters of the environment do not linger in the court system. And the opposition has some ideas, and we have shared some of them privately. We're still investigating as to what we believe should be done when it comes on to treating with matters of environmental breach. And perhaps on your return, we can speak some more about that.
Please, because we also have some concerns from JFJ around how these these issues really go through the court system, but also how independent NEPA is when you look at the fact that there is not a clear ministry dedicated to environment portfolio, and it is instead placed at the office of the Prime Minister. So we have some concerns around that, and we trust that we are able to, to have further conversation about it.
Yes.
But before we go into the break, Marcus, just about 30 seconds. Is the community signaling that they are interested in pursuing this matter legally?
Definitely. Mr. Gordon has been doing tireless work, to empower communities who want to take action, to basically galvanize, to organize in your own communities, to say who has been affected and how have you been affected.
Yes.
Let's get that data so we can start to track the impact. And so far, with also JFJ's help, we've been able to see a lot of significant health impacts, both in terms of asthma and other breathing issues, and also rash and skin issues we've seen by virtue of people having this contact with this pollutant in the water.
All right, great. Thanks so much. We're going to take the break now, and then we return with some more conversation on this important topic. Welcome back to the discussion that we're having, examining the impact of the Nrca Act spill. Senator, I think we're going to deliberately start with you for the conversation, because one of the things, the performance bond is some $115 million, yes? I stand corrected if I'm mistaken here. And we read some report from Minister Pernell Charles, in charge of Agriculture Ministry, to indicate that some $60 million is the estimated cost for the loss that farmers have seen. Both Marcus and Kestenard would have indicated that persons have health, medical challenges as a result. You're talking about water safety. So my question to you, Senator, if it is that the $115 million is not sufficient to compensate persons, who stands to pay and who stands to benefit from such compensation?
I think that's a very good question. And I do agree with both Kes and Marcus that the performance bond that has been called upon is really insignificant to cover the damages and the injury that has been experienced because of the spill. Do recall that certainly in terms of water implication, it stretches to 3 parishes. You had St. Catherine, you had Clarendon, and you had Kingston and St. Andrew. So you have the farmers in Clarendon and St. Catherine who are particularly impacted. And then you have the fisher folk who rely on the river for their sustenance and their livelihoods, and they too and their families would have been impacted. Now, I believe that given the limitation that the present act, whether it's the Wildlife Protection Act or the Nrca Act, has, the $100,000 at maximum or the $50,000 at minimum just can't do anything. The performance bond can't do anything. I believe that one of the things we have to do is to go back to the Constitution, because the Constitution does provide a right to a clean and a healthy environment. And every Jamaican, any person who is in Jamaica has that right. And I believe that the failure, and it is in fact a failure of NEPA to undertake its responsibility. And so in my mind, apart from the Criminal Act and the penalties therein provided by the criminal action and the penalty provided in the acts, that there is a case to be made out that the human rights and the rights that Jamaicans have, and particularly the residents in these communities that are impacted, could have a case against the government and the NRC and NEPA for their negligence.
So ultimately, the taxpayer will be paying for that, right? To be
it is, regrettably, it is a taxpayer, because that is where the government gets its money from, and it goes into the consolidated fund. However, this is why it is so very important that our laws are amended post haste. We have been calling, and when I say we, I'm talking about the opposition, and I'm quite sure we're not alone. We have been calling, for example, for an amendment to the Nrca Act, because the act is over 20 years old and it does not reflect present-day realities. There has to be some provision that allows the court of the day discretion to make a determination, not just in a criminal way, but also in a civil way, as to how much is a reasonable compensation for the damages and the injuries that persons have encountered. But the last thing I'll say before you go on to your panel is the issue of the Nrca is just one of the many instances. And Kes have been doing this, so he has a little bit more experience than I do. Marcus is in litigation, so they know more about this than I do. But when you look at the whole bauxite industry, the whole mining industry to be exact, is that there has been so many reports of injury. I mean, Marcus spoke about the respiratory challenges. I have seen it firsthand when I went to St. Elizabeth and St. Anne and just talked to the persons and the experiences they've had without any real compensation. And so I think that we should use the incident, however unfortunate it is, we should use it as a turning point as a country to truly give effect to persons' right to a clean and a healthy environment. And the mandate really rests with the government. Certainly on the opposition side, we'll continue to do our advocacy. But, we have to just remind Jamaicans that that is the best we can do. We can advocate for it, but the decision really rests with the government of the day.
All right, thank you.
As Senator would have mentioned the fact that the government is trying to build or they would have indicated that a second pond is going to be built. I believe Minister Samuda also said that in his comments, and that it would be finished between September and November. I wonder, is a pond really what we need? And I'll bring that to you, Mr. Goff. Is another pond, is that our best practice? Is that the best way that we can get rid of effluent? Or is there something more that can be done?
Right. So, as Senator Fraser said, we need to look at this thing now in terms of reform. Because what we were doing 40 years ago cannot be what we were saying is the best practice in the 21st century, right? Yes. And so I'm saying that there must be a way, and there is actually a way, right, for bauxite companies to dispose of their waste, their harmful waste, without putting the burden on the health of the nation through it going into our nation's rivers. So they can use some of the waste to do some landfill options, reduce the water content, and be able to even recycle some of what they need from those chemicals back into their operation. But we need to move away from having the river being the repository for Windalco's waste.
Your research, is this something that you've seen other nations implement successfully?
Yes, certainly the EU has a standard that we recognize, that we see that Windalco and their affiliates have to conform with in the EU, that says you cannot dispose of these waste materials in the river. You must find some other eco-friendly ways to do it. It may cost you some more money, but that is the sustainable way to deal with the waste.
So, not to be cheeky, but you said the Windalco, right, they're run by a company that is outside of Jamaica, Rusal. Right. So you're saying that Rusal in other jurisdictions would have been complying with higher standards of disposing of effluent.
Definitely, and again, it points to the lack of proper enforcement and environmental management here in Jamaica.
Well, that is quite something to consider.
So, Kestenard, what's your last call to the government here? Now that we've heard, my personal statement is that we need Nrca out of the office of the Prime Minister. I think it's a conflict of interest. Senator Fraser spoke to reform to the Nrca. What is your call?
My call is for the owners, the management of Windalco to be locked up. I am saying with this massive destruction of the environment, it's a criminal violation that they have done year after year, and they have gotten away with it. I am saying that even the court system, we thank God for the court system, and it is what I have been asking the people, not to take the law into their own hands to deal with Windalco, because they have the numbers and they have the know-how to get at Windalco. There's no question about that. They have it organized, and I just want to tell this country, you understand, that if the government does not use its executive powers to rein in Windalco, there's going to be a revolution up there. We are asking the people to hold strain and to wait on the court system.
All right, thank you
and
so
that
much.
Is, and that's what we are saying. The management of Windalco should be locked up. This could not, if it was a poor person running a little factory somewhere along the line, the very same Jamaican police who said the other day that they cannot intervene in this matter, they would have gone to kick down the doors of every Jamaican who does that and lock them up. What kind of country we live in? A democratic country where the government cannot go on the side of the poor people and make an order and get rid of this burden on the poor people of this country.
All right, so that's where we're going to leave the discussion, and I trust if the government is listening, it is very clear that urgent updates are needed so persons know where we stand. Senator Fraser Binns, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to steal Marcus and Kestenard with us since they're in studio, so that those who are calling in can direct some questions to them. Thank you again, Senator.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Great. Just reminding listeners that they can call. Jade, remind us of the numbers,
Yes,
please.
absolutely. So you can call the studio line, which is 876-676-4996, and you can also WhatsApp to 239-7583.
And for those who are watching live on YouTube, we're also monitoring that, so you can leave your comments there.
And be sure to send responses to our trivia of the week to that WhatsApp number I just read. It is, when did Jamaicans gain the right to a healthy environment? You have the chance to win $1,000 of credit of the network of your choice. So you can send that response to 876-239-7583. So while we wait on our callers to come in, we are going to look at this week's public view.
So remind us of the question that was asked to the public.
So the public was asked about the government's response. What more could the government do to ensure the protection of our environment? So
my hand's not moving as fast as yours, Jade, so I think the age probably showing now.
I want to say the age shows every week, but I'm going to be kind. Yes, so we would have asked our engagers and listeners, what more can the government do to protect Jamaican environment? I'm just going to read one comment before we break. And this comment says, they need to strengthen whatever legislative framework exists to deal with the environment and to give an oversight agency like Nrca prosecutory powers. Wow, this is a bright comment. And the government also has to be committed to being stewards of the environment and building that into our national consciousness as well. And so with that, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with taking your questions and calls.
Welcome back to the program. We have Mr. Garth Campbell with us.
Hello.
Welcome. Go ahead, Mr. Campbell.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What's your question or comment?
First Vice President for the Willowdene and St. John's Garden Citizens Benevolent Association.
Yes.
I am a returning resident. I returned back to Jamaica 2017. I lived overseas for 41 years. To a community like Willowdene, where I have my house, I have experienced the disruption of our water on numerous occasions.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we have that, since 2017, I have noticed we are getting the same excuse that when they have overflow into the Nrca Act. And I have no couple of people that used to work in Vindalco that lives in the community about pond, and that the water comes off the mountain and the pond is unable to control the volume of water. And I understand that the government, both parties actually, know about the capacity, the water that comes off the road, and nothing has been done to alleviate that. We, as a community, we have people with serious ailments.
Yes.
And it's not the problem, it's the long-term effect. Because I hear someone here, Senator Binns, made mention about the monetary stuff, the monetary amount of money that proposing. That is not enough for next 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line. The mother gave 24 hours people with all sorts of rashes, people breed respiratory ill, and so forth. And this is an ongoing problem because we cannot truck water in here. The majority of
Mr. Campbell, you're breaking up a little, but if I'm to get what you're saying, it's the water supply issues, but more so the matter of long-term health implications for residents.
That's right. The long-term health implications for residents.
Yes.
We have quite a few seniors in here. A lot of seniors. Most of them are retired and returning residents. We have young ones here, babies, and unable to get to access water, clean, good water for 2.5 weeks. That is not right.
Yes.
You understand? When you expect that you would have water, I'm blaming the National Water Commission because what they did is to protect us. But how often we'll have to go through this, for instance, we don't have any water because of the rain and the water goes down into over.
What I can say, Mr. Campbell, we're breaking up and we want to get to the next caller, but please note that Jamaicans for Justice, we are establishing partnerships with Kestanard here and Marcus and others to see how best we can support the communities. So if you have not yet left your information, please do so to the WhatsApp number 239-7583. And we will see how best we can support you and your neighbors. All right, thank you so much for calling.
I appreciate it.
Have a good day.
Welcome, Carlene.
Hi, good afternoon to you ladies hosting a wonderful program. And greetings to Kestanard and to Marcos.
Good afternoon.
I want Mr. Gordon to just amplify some more what he touched on. It just didn't sound right to me when he mentioned that in his mind, he thinks, he used the term gag order may have been placed on NEPA. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking NEPA is filled with the technocrats who should really be presenting an impartial view on these matters. So there is an effluent spill. All right, so NEPA would be called in, you come in, you do your testing, samples are tested, and you simply report your findings. It should have nothing to do with feeling that you may not want a particular person to look bad or look good for that matter. It's just simply your position of presenting findings. And I'm saying this should be NEPA's approach regardless of which project is undertaken across the island. If you're to do your EIA, you present your findings impartially.
Yes.
So I don't see the fact that they operate, as you had said, in the Office of the Prime Minister. That should have no bearing on their presenting their facts because they are not an opinionated entity. They simply should present facts.
And if I may, before Kestanard addresses that, we just like to address a little bit of what you would have said because even today in the Glino we had an editorial about
I saw it, yes.
Right, and I think that is where Mr. Gordon's concerns come from because regardless of facts presented in reports that clearly state that it is necessary for an EIA to be done, for example, it's not done, and that is something that is an ability for them to do under the Act is to forego it, even where it may be affecting communities in a very negative way. So I think that it goes back to the major points that we would have articulated already, that we do need some legislative reform because where it is now, NEPA is able to make some discretionary decisions regardless of their findings that in the end affects these communities in a serious negative manner.
And you can't ignore where NEPA ultimately is housed and the fact that there are conflicting portfolio responsibilities under that same ministry, which is a very large ministry by the Office of the Prime Minister, that in some instances NEPA's own pursuant pursuance of certain things may very well be undermined or compromised because of commerce activities. And JFJ's own call is that NEPA should become a body of parliament. And I know persons have similarly made that call. I saw a tweet that Carol Narcisse made this morning, and if I personally stand with it, and I think I speak on behalf of JFJ in this situation here, that NEPA ought to have some more levels of autonomy. But Kestanard?
Firstly, let us realize that the government is the employer of NEPA. NEPA is a servant of the government. The government dictates the policies under which NEPA operates. And if NEPA goes out of guideline, the government has measures to rein them in. And therefore, usually you would have people like Mr. Richard Nelson, who would be very open to the media. When last have you heard Richard Nelson appeared on any program to answer a question, explaining anything to the people? Mr. Knight used to be very open. They no longer speak. And I'm telling you, the minister who is in charge of NEPA right now does not have the right personality to deal with this kind of situation. In my view, I can only say in my view, his temperament illustrates a level of arrogance, right? And he has put a gag order on NEPA, and I don't care what they want to say. He has put a gag order on NEPA.
I would want us to
NEPA
make inflammatory comments.
No, well, each time you ask NEPA, they will refer you to. You talk with Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson refers you to Mr. Knight. You talk to Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight refers you to the ministry or wherever. Yes. They're not talking to the media. And Jamaica is a known country worldwide for its openness where media is concerned. We are also noted for our clean water supply.
So in your call, you're asking for
more
both the minister and NEPA to be a little bit more transparent.
Exactly, and to reveal the terms of the conditionalities of that notice that they serve. The Jamaican people deserve that right. They have that right. It's a decent way to deal with your people. They are the ones who elected you. Show some homage, some respect to the people. Don't be so contemptuous of the people. You're allowing this conglomerate to come and poison the water of your people, and you just take it so. It cannot. It's not right. It's not correct.
Marcus, just for you to quickly close out for us. Last month, we have another?
Yeah, so we have one more caller.
Okay.
So before we close out, we'll take this last caller.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, so, I mean, this issue to me is deeply concerning. I think I very much agree with the guest. When you're looking at long-term development of the country, you have to prioritize your people. You have to prioritize their environment. And one of the issue we have with these large companies is that they tend to look in the very short term and try to maximize profits. Now, I really want to focus my comment on NEPA. There have been many issues raised in the past about NEPA's own ability to operate independently and to actually carry out sanctions for breaches against the environment. And I really think this should be an area that we focus on, because ideally what you want is an environmental agency that is sufficiently empowered to actually carry out its duties and ensure that when there's a breach, the company in breach is held responsible, kind of like the utilities regulation does very effectively. So those would be my comments for today, and thank you guys for your good work in highlighting this issue.
Thank you very much for sharing.
Just 1 second. When you look what happened in Edgewater the other day, the pollution over by Edgewater, the kill off all of the fishes.
In Portmore there.
Yes, you see these large companies, they operate in contempt of the laws of Jamaica, and listen, you have some mega polluters of the environment in Jamaica that are getting away with murder.
All right, thanks so much. Marcus, your last statement before we close out?
Well, just to say that I think, all of you said today is very important. I think that, looking at NEPA as what is the role of the Environmental Protection Agency in a small island developing state? We don't have water and land to throw away and waste, right? And so I think we need to rethink how we position and empower such an organization, because again, in the past, I think the environment was part and parcel of development that you must go through to ensure you meet the proper checks and so forth. But we need an environmental watchdog in government, you know, that can be like a human rights organization consistent with our new constitutional right to a healthy environment.
And United Nations, they recently indicated that the right to a healthy environment is a human right.
Yes.
So having said that, Jade, you're the bright spark among the young bright spark. What is the response, the answer for the trivia?
So the question was, when did Jamaica gain their right to an healthy environment? So the answer is 2011. And I believe we do have a winner.
Yes.
So,
and that winner is, drum roll please. All right. Sophia Hay, thank you so much for paying attention, and you are the winner of $1,000 credit. I can't pick up which network this is, but we will text you that credit, right? So thanks again to our guest and our technical team. And of course, I have to play on the young. Why am I telling them millennial and the age thing? It upsets me greatly. But, you know, since I soon reach certain age and so on, just want to...
Why we're protecting the environment, you know, it's for them. It's for Jade and them.
But thank you so much to our listeners. And there is a quote actually that we would want to close out the show with, and it is by Benjamin Franklin, and it says that justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. So I think we have to be guided by quotes such as these. So I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director.
And I'm Jade Williams, Policy and Advocacy Specialist. Thanks to our guests who were in studio, and to Senator Fraser Binns, who joined us online. And thanks again to our sponsor, Open Society Foundation, and to our host station, Bridge 99 FM. And we'll see you guys next week, same time at 1 p.m.
Great.